These are some of the most disturbing individuals in the furry community, and as the list goes on, what each of them did will just keep getting worse. Nitro Lord, also known as Crystal81 and Lore Bunny, was a 20-year-old Roblox YouTuber with over 150,000 subscribers and millions of views. He became known for making videos about the game's history, which quickly gained popularity during 2021. What his viewers didn't know though was that behind the screen, he was doing something that should have been never linked to a kid's game. In early May 2024, Nitro's Twitter account starts getting noticed, after a lot of people would catch him regularly interacting with highly inappropriate furry content. It's a strange thing to do, especially for someone with a young fanbase, but it's still nothing straight up illegal. However, something far more disturbing than that was discovered not long after. It turns out he also ran a second account named Lore Bunny, one that shows an even worse side of him. Completely different from the image he portrayed in his videos, on his alt account he would be found following both minors and explicit NSFW accounts at the same time, while also reposting disturbing material himself. Some of these posts would show suggestive drawings of human-like puppies with no clothes on. But what makes it even more alarming though is that his account was publicly linked to one of his Roblox alt accounts, meaning even his younger fans, by just going through his game profile, could have easily ended up seeing all of that. And it actually gets only worse from there. A Twitter user by the name of Schlep would discover that Nitro also ran a third account under the name Lil Pupcake, where he would repost even more disgusting things, like a cup in soiled diaper, as well as baby animals shown in deeply inappropriate positions. And with all of that already out in the open, it was only a matter of time before somebody stepped in. In September, a YouTuber named Ruben Sim would call Nitro out directly, confronting him over everything he'd been doing up to this point. Now in response to that, Nitro would actually post a public apology video on his YouTube channel, explaining that his actions were wrong and why they were wrong, and saying that it's important to protect minors from that kind of content. Now he doesn't really mention the most serious parts of the backlash, like how he directly linked his explicit Twitter accounts to one of his Roblox alts, where most of his fans are actually kids who could have easily found the things he posted. But nonetheless, the video makes it sound like he understands how messed up all of that was. And for a moment, it seems like the call out might have actually gotten through to him. But not long after, on a brand new account, Nitro and his girlfriend would announce that they were hosting an in-person furry party open to all ages, even though it included things that were completely inappropriate for children, like freaky adult-themed gear, and they were openly allowing minors to be around adults wearing these suggestive furry outfits, something that could easily go wrong. On a fall night in the bushes outside of a furry convention hosting what appears to be a freaky night, Nitro and his girlfriend were getting ready to host that very same event. An entire month had already passed since they first posted the ad, and despite everything that had come out, they decided to still go through with it. And yes, they would actually host the event on the night of November 1st, right outside Furry Apocalypse's Freak Show night. There aren't any pictures, videos or mentions of it anywhere, but Nitro would actually later admit to it directly in a live reaction video he posted in response to a documentary made about him in the same month. And in that clip, he actually tries to defend the decision to host an all-ages furry freak party.
The party didn't end up being that popular because it was like picked out at a spot that was kind of like secluded away from the hotel. Like the majority of the people that came to it were like people in me and my girlfriend's friend circle. They're all 18 and up. So I can promise you without a shadow of the doubt, there were no minors at this party.
After everything that had already been exposed about Nitro, it makes even less sense why he and his girlfriend would go forward with a party like that. It wasn't just the risk of minors seeing something inappropriate, it was the fact that they let them in the same space as adults wearing that kind of gear, knowing full well what kind of people that could bring in. And he later actually defended it by saying it was only promoted through his alt account and not on his YouTube channel. But that doesn't change the fact that the alt was already linked to him and the ad was pretty easy to find. In the end, no one was reported to be harmed, and while neither of them faced legal charges, what they planned was still reckless. This next case though had the police chasing after him.
Kira's grandmother spoke with me today. She says all she wants to do is give her granddaughter a hug.
It's May 2nd, 2016. A 16-year-old girl named Kiara Inman is reported missing from her home in Spokane, Washington. Right away, her entire family goes into a panic, and an Amber Alert is issued as soon as they're able to get it out. But not long after that, a note is found at her grandparents' house, telling them to not come looking for her, and saying that she isn't actually coming back, causing what would become her parents' worst nightmare. Now the question is, how did this even happen in the first place? Zachary Jones, better known online as Zello or the Wingless Forest Dragon, isn't what you'd call an ordinary 30-year-old guy. He identifies as someone who's into animals with human-like traits, and often posts artwork of them on various furry sites, along with photos of himself actually. And unfortunately, this is where he comes across Kiara, also known online as Ayana Wolf. It's not exactly clear how that conversation started, but users from the furry community would later discover a post Kiara made on April 23rd, where she shared her artwork and revealed they were in a relationship. And then, exactly 9 days later, on Sunday afternoon, Kiara willingly leaves her home on May 1st, telling her family she's meeting a friend. Now hours pass without a word from her, and even after an entire day goes by with no sign of where she went, her grandparents decide to issue an Amber Alert, and the police decide to begin searching for her.
As the hours tick by,
I keep trying to think of the positive things.
Sheila Breezes and her husband hope that the girl who painted these pictures will return home very soon.
Only after the news of her disappearance comes out, her parents somehow find out she'd met Zach online, and in the weeks leading up to her going missing, he'd been coaching her on how to leave her family behind and run away with him.
She left us a beautiful note telling us how much she loved us and that she knew this was going to be hard.
And after that, Kiara's family also discovered that both of them had been lying to each other about their age. Kiara actually claimed that she was 19, when in reality she was only 16. Zach, on the other hand, told her that he was 28, but he was actually a 30-year-old grown man. And on top of that, her parents know that Kiara is developmentally delayed and has the mentality of an 11-year-old, which makes it of course easier for Zach to manipulate her and gain her trust. Now the details start spreading online, and the entire situation actually causes a wave of controversy across the furry community. Many are frustrated that yet another predator was dragging the rest of them down with him. And one user named Rune actually made a blog post about the case, saying that the focus should actually be on bringing Kiara home safely. But instead, it turned into a debate over who was really at fault. Rune points out that even if Zach believed Kiara was 19, it still didn't excuse what he did, especially since her condition meant that she couldn't legally give consent in the first place. They say the moment he saw the Amber Alert, he should have gone straight to the authorities and explained his side. But instead, he kept driving and actually avoided the police. He even posted online asking for help with her liver medication, making things just worse. Zach had multiple chances to walk away, but chose to not take any of them. But finally, after 48 agonizing hours for Kiara's family, her parents would receive a call confirming that she's been found safe, over 2,200 miles away, at a rest stop west of Columbus, Ohio. She had been spotted by a state patrol officer during a routine check, where both she and Zach were found asleep in the car and said to be cooperating. Now once the family actually heard the news, they immediately rushed across the country to reach her. And when they finally do, they're overwhelmed with relief just seeing her again. And Kiara would actually be taken to the hospital to get checked out, while Zach is arrested on the spot and charged with kidnapping. Unlike him though, the next person did something even worse, and somehow got away with it.
The dog's name was Rigsby. He went missing on January 2nd. Now 18-year-old Wolfie is under investigation.
Back in early 2010, in San Antonio, Texas, a group of teenagers and young adults who believed they were wolves on the inside banded together to form something they called the Crimson Blood Wolf Pack, treating each other as a kind of wolf family. And for a while, everything seemed wholesome and fine, until their so-called alpha dog gets caught in one of the most gruesome crimes no one should ever think of doing: Wolfie Blackheart, also known as the leader of this pack, was an 18-year-old young woman who was actually known not just in her own group, but by other packs around the San Antonio area. She had a gothic style and believed she was part wolf, and she even said she was allergic to silver, which is known to be a weakness of werewolves in fiction. And while she definitely came off as unusual, nothing really seemed wrong about that on the surface with what she was doing. That would change in January 2010 though. A photo would appear on 4chan showing an outstretched arm holding what looked like a dog's head, and the image would spread fast, causing a wave of attention toward where it came from and what led up to it. For those not familiar with the deeper parts of 4chan, it's actually well known that this site takes cases of animal abuse very seriously, and this case would be no exception. In response to this image, users would create an IRC chat room, which was basically an old school group chat, to figure out what really happened. With the help of EXIF data, which is hidden info stored in an image file, such as date, time, and sometimes even location, 4chan somehow managed to trace the possible source of the photo to Wolfie Blackheart and a few friends connected to the Crimson Blood Wolf pack. And from there, names and phone numbers would be uncovered, and before long, users began firing off a wave of calls and texts to those specific numbers, hoping somebody would just confess what actually happened, and they would actually push someone close to Wolfie to come forward with an explanation. This person went by the name of Razor, and he would join the IRC chat to post the following message.
Everyone, shut up for a second. I'm Russ. No one killed the dog. A truck running through my neighborhood ran him over. I tried to save him, but he died on the way to the vet. I'm the dog's caretaker. He was a stray. I took him in. I hate my friends for defiling the body. They beheaded it. The dog died in a car accident. They just messed with the body.
And even after this message, a phone call with Razor would reveal more about what happened. He claims the dog in question was a stray named Shadow, taken in by one of Wolfie's friends. And just like he said in the IRC chat, the story was that Shadow escaped their yard and unfortunately got hit by a car. And in the same call, he says that the body was handed off to a couple of friends to prepare for burial. But somewhere along the way, they decided to keep the head. And with Wolfie, who really liked to collect animal skulls, it would eventually be given to her. Now, despite his confession, this could still be possibly a criminal case. So the users on 4chan actually dig up Razor's real name. And with everything they found, including the chat logs, they bring it all to the San Antonio police and the local news. Now, around this same time, things take another strange turn. A woman named Kathy Silva, who actually lived near Wolfie, would come forward, claiming that Shadow was actually her missing dog. According to her, his real name was Rigsby, and he disappeared from her backyard earlier that month. And this would actually cause some people to believe that the dog might have been stolen, but nothing was ever proven at the end of the day. If Kathy really was the owner, it's just as likely that Rigsby escaped on his own and was mistaken for a stray before ending up with Wolfie's group. Now, with all of that going around, the police would start looking into Wolfie directly. After finding out she owned multiple animal skulls and hearing that she may have been given the dog's body, it's enough to move forward with a search warrant. And once it's approved, officers go into her house immediately and begin the search. And inside, they actually find what's left of the animal, just the skull, believed to be the removed head of Shadow or Rigsby, confirming that the photo wasn't a hoax after all. They also discover other clean skulls, such as of a sheep, a coyote, and a wild boar, revealing that cleaning skulls and keeping them had been her hobby long before this even happened. And this is also when the news stations actually chime in.
Sarah Rodriguez prefers to be called Wolfie. She wears a tail, a collar, and a harness. A group of people, mostly online, have accused her of beheading a dog.
And Wolfie responded to all of this, claiming that she didn't do anything illegal.
I didn't kill any animal. I wouldn't. Like I said, I'd be more likely to hurt a human than a dog any day. And even then, very, very, not really possible.
And she actually says that she's being harassed instead, and that people have even hacked into her online accounts.
They put child porn on my profile, a lot of bad, nasty stuff. I've been getting death threats phone calls, a whole bunch of stuff.
And she speaks out several times to tell her side of the story, saying that she didn't remove the dog's head, but only after it was already passed away. She simply preserved the skull as a kind of spiritual keepsake for its current owner, who was also part of the same group.
I did behead him. I didn't kill him. He was my friend. His name was Shadow, and he got hit by a car, and they brought his corpse to me, and they asked me to get his skull, so I did. But the owner's girlfriend took a picture of him, and they put it online, and that's what caused all the fuss.
At the end of the raid, no animal abuse charges were filed, though the investigation was still ongoing. And despite the backlash, police didn't find anything that showed Wolfie had actually ended the dog's life. From what it looked like, they believed the story about Shadow being hit by a car, and there was nothing to suggest that the head was removed out of cruelty. With all that considered, the case would be closed and finally come to an end, with Wolfie stepping away from the public eye. This next person, however, is famous, but famous for all of the wrong things.
What is the age of consent for an animal? Please tell me. I really want to know. I'm on pins and needles.
Standards to an animal. A 15-year-old animal is not underage.
Sean Grace, otherwise known online as Quantum Kitty, was a former United States Marine in his mid-20s, and he often described himself as somebody with a deep dislike for human society and someone who had a disturbing attraction to animals. He wasn't known on the internet at first, but once his crimes started to surface publicly, it became clear where he went down as one of the most deranged figures in the furry community. And it all starts in early 2021, when Sean suddenly gets invited to an explicitly pro-zoo podcast called Zooer Than Thou, a show that openly attempts to justify and normalize relationships between humans and animals. And he would join as a guest and later become part of a network of people who actively defend, engage, and promote bestiality, which involves performing non-consensual acts on animals. Just to get an idea of what's going on the podcast, these are some of the things that Sean and the two other hosts were talking about.
Today we're centering our discussion on animal autonomy and speciesism, and for many of us on the podcast, it's the kind of discussion that leads to a certain worldview some find controversial.
You mean the part where we have sex with animals?
And what's controversial about that?
Now, disregarding this podcast, an earlier post actually starts to gain attention from him. Now, not long after, people from the furry community would begin to go after him directly because they didn't want to be associated with Sean. Two of these people being known as Coyote Lovely and Relly, and they would actually manage to get into a Discord call with Sean to confront him about the things he's been doing online, which actually included allegedly sending bestiality content to people not of age.
It showed one of these Schrodinger accounts actually sending a cat or an animal of sorts having sexual intercourse or about to have sexual intercourse with a human with the tagline, "How does this not look like consent?" or something along those lines. Was that you?
Yes, that was me.
And when asked about it, Sean says that he only sent the content as part of an argument. He explains that he had been debating those people that were not of age on whether dogs could consent or not, and says that the content was meant to prove that they could.
This wasn't just some person I saw on Twitter opened up the DMs and sent them dog porn. This was someone I was having a debate with, and of course they were making, the argument animals can't consent, they don't want to do it, it's all rape. And I found this specific video where the dog is very clearly and engaged in it. I sent this video as evidence and I said, look at this video, this dog is clearly enjoying it. Then they just freaked out, ew, gross, blah blah blah.
And as the call goes on, the two just keep pushing back on his beliefs, but Sean would still argue and go as far as comparing fully developed animals to children, claiming that animals were ready for intimate contact while children clearly weren't.
You're equating fully developed animals who are fully developed to engage in interaction to children who are absolutely not.
And after that, he says that he wouldn't dare be physically involved with what he calls underage animals.
If you actually go pick up a puppy from the pound and then wait until it's old enough to have sex with it, does that make you an orbiter as well? Or were you a pet? Like, what is that?
Well, considering I don't have sex with underage animals, no, I'm not a pet.
Now, for quite some time, there have actually been allegations floating around about Sean, and those allegations were sending explicit content to minors. And this would actually turn out to be a fact. It turns out he's not only been sharing graphic material involving non-consensual acts with animals, but he was also leaking personal information of one of the minors to other people.
He sent it to several minors, including me. He saved and posted a photo of me without my consent. So now not only has he sent me bestiality, he saved a photo of me and posted it as his argument with someone else.
While that alone is already disturbing and definitely illegal, a later post would reveal Sean's disgusting and depraved actions towards animals that makes the situation 1,000 times worse. In late December of 2021, a former friend of Sean by the name of Wintergreen decides to actually expose him for his actions. After getting so sick of him saying and doing things no person should ever even be capable of thinking about, Wintergreen starts claiming that
Quantum also took a young deer's body, stuffed it in his fridge, and had relations with it for 3 days. He's had consistent bloodstains left in his house from engaging with the deer corpses, and his one regret was a rotting raccoon that he engaged with. Quantum is He's even been looked into by the feds for sending explicit material to kids. A 40-year-old's dick for a job too. Told me once his puppy wet the bed, or floor, or something, and Quantum there near threw him, slapped him apparently. Quantum apparently has no firearm discipline either. Last time Redacted and Quantum got together, he was acting like a Billy Badass with his AR, had a loaded mag gun, non-chambered, and had the flash suppressor pointed at the dog's head.
These claims, along with other messages talking about Sean's cruel actions, would be confirmed by yet another set of screenshots, showing messages Sean had sent to another acquaintance of his through Telegram, Zerkalo. In them, Sean would just straight up admit, as a teenager he was sadistic toward both animals and people. He talks about hurting a family dog so bad it lost consciousness, then lying to his parents about it. He also confesses to physically attacking his disabled brother out of pure frustration, just because he was angry at a mere video game. And this still isn't the end of his message. In the same conversation, Sean admits that starting in 2018, he'd done unspeakable things to the remains of the deer he found along the roadside. He says it happened dozens of times. He would sometimes even drag the bodies into the woods, sometimes into his car, and sometimes even into his house. And in one case, he kept a deer in his fridge for 2 days, so he could continue doing what he did to it. And he talks about how hard it was to be even near it after a while because the stench got so bad. He actually had to wear a respirator just to stay in the same room. And he also mentions a fox, saying that it wasn't actually for him, but for someone else who had asked him to bring it back so they could keep parts of it. And he also casually just admits violating a friend's dog without the friend's knowledge, insisting that the dog didn't need anyone's permission. Now fortunately, it was only a matter of time before the police got involved, after all the gut-wrenching things Sean had done. In June of 2022, neighbors began contacting the St. Mary's County Sheriff's Office about a foul stench coming from his property. Some even claimed that they saw piles of bones, while others mentioned dead animals and burn pits. And eventually, deputies arrived with a search warrant, and what they found was worse than they expected. Animal remains were scattered across the yard in various stages of decay, so they seized his phone as evidence, and when investigators examined its contents, they uncovered that Sean had filmed himself committing acts of abuse with his dog. And even more disturbing, he didn't just keep the footage, he shared it with others online and even invited people to take part. But on August 20th, 2024, Sean Grace was convicted of distributing obscene material, possession with intent to distribute, and 2 counts of aggravated animal cruelty. Then on October 1st, he was finally sentenced to 7 years in prison. This next case though wasn't just one person. An entire group traumatized a little boy.
We have uncovered a ring of grown men who have been a young boy over the period of the last 7 years.
It's early 2016. A 38-year-old man named David Parker would come under investigation after a case is filed accusing him of ongoing predatory acts against a child. At first, it seems like the typical case of a deranged person being locked up and getting what they deserve, until the victim, who we'll call Simon from now on, says something that changes everything. Simon wasn't just being taken advantage of by David, but he would talk about being taken to group meetups where he was harmed in deeply inappropriate ways by multiple men while they wore fursuits, which are these animal costumes. And he names several names, including Kenneth Fenske, who was 57 at the time, and Craig Michael Knox, who was 35 during the same period. And he gives the investigators the entire timeline of when it all started and how it ended, going all the way back to 2009. Simon is 9 years old when David brings him to a house in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Inside, there's already a group of men gathered, most of them wearing full-body animal suits and calling themselves furries. And as soon as they walk in, one of them, dressed as a red fox and going by the name of Lupine, approaches Simon, takes him upstairs, and proceeds to do unimaginable things. And back in 2016, with Simon's testimony and investigation underway, police would eventually confirm that the man who called himself Lupine was actually Kenneth. And the house Simon has been taken to in 2009 turns out to be Kenneth's own home, where those group meetups had taken place. Now Kenneth and David actually get arrested, but one of the names Simon gave, Craig, still hasn't been looked into, but he would also come under investigation soon enough. And according to Simon, Craig was actually the most disturbing member of the group. He even took him to a house in Pittston, a different part of Pennsylvania where most of the taking advantage of happened. And Simon tells them that before he even turned 13, David had taken him to other homes and apartments where more adults took advantage of him in the same way. Now fortunately, Craig gets investigated and the police successfully raid his home, and they don't just find evidence of child endangerment, they actually find another person, his roommate, a 30-year-old man named Stephen Taylor, who would also be arrested and charged with bestiality. And later during questioning, Craig admits that David had actually encouraged him to have at it with Simon. He tells them he took Simon to an upstairs bedroom and defiled him there, and that afterward, David forced the boy to perform explicit acts on him as well. And the police actually arrest yet another man, 40-year-old Jeffrey Harvey, in an undercover operation. Posing as a 13-year-old, an investigator arranged to meet him, which led to his attempt to engage in inappropriate acts. And during the interrogation of him, Jeffrey would surprisingly hand over texts that he exchanged with David. Messages in which he admits wanting to be intimate with both David and Simon. Simon, on the other hand, would enter foster care and begin therapy, while all 5 men would be behind bars for crimes that went on for over 7 years. But somehow what comes next is even worse and far more dangerous.
Seta shared photos of Pernas adopting a black puppy from one of their charity events, the same black puppy from a charity event that Wolf mutilated and butchered.
On September 16, 2018, Pseudonym, a person or volunteer who took it up upon themselves to investigate and expose people involved in would post a Twitter thread exposing several names connected to the so-called Zoo Zadist Telegram groups. While many of the people listed had already done horrifying things that most would consider criminal, readers would soon notice one name that stood out. This was someone whose actions went far beyond the rest. Ruben Marrero Pernas, better known online as Wolf SS, or as most people know him as Wolf. He is a 36-year-old man living in Cuba. He is actually a highly educated guy working at the Cuban Neuroscience Center. But in January 2018, Wolf, or Ruben, would start speaking with another Zoo Zadist on Telegram, going by the name of Snake Thing, the same person I covered in the first Furry Crimes video. In their chats, he shared photos and stories about the horrific things he inflicted on dogs and puppies alike. And at one point, he even told Snake Thing that he made a wooden stake covered in honey to attract fire ants, and once it was swarming with them, he would use it to hurt dogs. Snake Thing would later spread these logs to others, bringing even more attention to what Wolf had done. And for a while, it looked like Wolf's crimes would stay buried, until 7 months later when Pseudonym decided to publish the Zoo Zadist leaks. His content wasn't just violent, but it showed a level of sadism that most people didn't even think was possible. But But unlike the others, he left behind almost nothing that could tie it back to him personally, with the only details being that he spoke Spanish, worked with electrical equipment, and had once used the alias Work. His messages gave the furry community almost nothing to work with. They wanted to find out who this person was, and so they would begin digging through the photos he shared, hoping they could identify and report it. Some people tried analyzing the plants in the background, although that didn't lead anywhere, so their attention actually shifted to one particular photo, showing an ice cream parlor near where he worked, and the tablecloth of that photo looked very specific, very unusual. And one of the flavors actually was apple, which was rare enough so they could identify the shop and narrow down where he was located. The parlor seemed like a small local store, and over the next few days, people began messaging ice cream parlors and bakeries across the United States. Now there was at least one innocent shop that was falsely accused, but they eventually found the right one. The shop was Himalaya Habana, an ice cream parlor in Havana, Cuba. And with that confirmed, people started searching through bestiality forums looking for a Cuban user with matching interests and behavior. And they eventually found a man on a certain website called Beast Forum using the name Wolf SS. Wolf SS uploaded several videos of himself harming his own dogs, mostly Rottweilers, and on his profile was the email address wolf.schwartz39, which brought up a Google account under the name Wolf Schwartz, almost identical to the alias Work Schwartz he once used while commenting on the memorial page of another zoo sadist. Now, not long after, on a platform called Agregame, they found photos of the exact same man, who could be seen in several of the Wolf SS videos posted to Beast forums. Now, even with that, the community searching through the photos weren't fully convinced. So they decided to take a shot in the dark and emailed both addresses linked to Wolf, and to their surprise, he actually responded. And in the email, he wouldn't deny doing all of these things that he'd been accused of, and he would actually be convinced to join a Telegram group chat where he would drop a text document containing 4,000 words written entirely by him, and in that text message, he begged to not have his name exposed. He blamed everything on other people and even cried about his broken soul, and went on about times he's been nice to dogs. But not once did he even acknowledge what he actually did. It was clear he had no actual remorse for what he'd done. Instead, he tried to present himself as some kind of sympathetic victim. But with the new email confirmed to be his, there was no question anymore. Wolf, Schwarzweiler, Wolf SS, and every other pseudonym he used were all tied to the same man, Ruben Marrero Pernas. And after that, the community who investigated him compiled everything into a PDF and uploaded it to 8chan. They included his name, his address, and the videos and the photos of him. Everything was in it, an entire docs. And with that kind of proof, it looked like Wolf would finally be put behind bars. But there was one problem. Cuba didn't have any laws against animal abuse or bestiality, or even the most basic form of cruelty. No matter how much evidence they actually would turn in, the authorities had no power to act. So despite everything, it looks like Ruben would stay free and able to keep hurting dogs with no real consequences. That is until someone by the name of Steinball928 reached out to Cubanos on Defensa de los Animales, or CEDA, a Cuban animal rights group. They were given every piece of evidence collected on Wolf so far, and 2 months later, in November 2018, CEDA would respond with a public statement.
With deep pain and outrage, she posted information that was sent with sufficient evidence of its veracity. So with full responsibility, and after trying to channel it through the corresponding channels without success, today we report the citizen Ruben Marrero Pernas, 29 years old and worker until now of the scientific pole, responded to a call from CEDA to rescue a 2-month-old puppy in the month of April. The puppy was abandoned in the street in central Havana in a pile of garbage. Unfortunately, this individual, after adopting the puppy, tortured, mutilated, and killed her days later in a way that's hard to believe that a human being can do.
They continued by confirming CEDA had graphic proof of Ruben's actions, and it wasn't limited to just one dog. More evidence showed he'd inflicted extreme harm on others, then posted photos and videos online, some coming from outside Cuba. And at the time of their post, Ruben was still free, walking on the streets of Havana. And based on everything they'd seen, CEDA believed he would do it again. And so they tried to warn the public. They released his photos alongside one of the puppies he brutally harmed to make sure everyone knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. The statement also mentioned his involvement in PAC activities, a Cuban animal rescue group, which means he was actually still trying to get closer to more animals. So CEDA urged every protection group and concerned citizen to share his face and spread the warning before more poor dogs suffered the same fate. This news actually enraged the Cuban citizens, many of whom actually called for justice, and the police would eventually respond to the pressure after CEDA and other animal rights groups went public with all the information on him, and his dogs would actually be rescued by the Cuban Dog Tails Rescue, and officers would uncover bones and remains of dogs buried near his home, and as a result, Wolf would get fired and placed in police custody. But just as everybody feared, he wouldn't stay there for long. Cuba still has no laws to charge him under, and despite all the evidence, they would simply have to let him go. On December 20th, 2018, CEDA would then post another warning to keep the public alert.
Let's not forget that Ruben Marrero Pernas and others like him are still on the streets, following animal groups and causing harm to the animals we try to protect. Rumor has it he has contact with dogs again.
And after that, Slimeball, the person who first exposed him, would reveal more information about him, saying that some of Ruben's friends were actually already trying to get back his dogs, even though his face could be clearly seen in the footage of what he did to them. And around the same time, 2 dogs would actually be found dumped in a river near Ruben's house. Now there was no way to confirm or deny if he was behind it, but the timing and location just made people suspicious. And while researching this video, Slimeball actually posted this.
Wolf was caught out trying to procure a puppy from a new rescue not far from his house just last week. The lady running it didn't know him, but she said something was off and contacted CEDA.
And despite everything held against him, he still is a free man. Now he stayed a free man until January, where Slimeball would announce that Ruben was pending trial despite being released. No further updates would come out since. And because of this huge public outrage, on April 7th, 2019, hundreds of Cuban citizens would actually march for animal rights. It was the first protest in the country's history that wasn't run or backed by the government, and for many it was the only way they could fight back against people like Ruben. But even after all of this, Ruben still isn't actually in prison. And let's move on to the most disturbing case of this video.
From the cutting dogs open and their entrails while they were still alive and screaming in pain habit that he has developed.
It's the fall of 2016. Levi Dane Simmons, who will also meet online as Snake Thing, is a 21-year-old man from Oregon. He arrives at a local Motel 6 with a 12-year-old bully mixed puppy, just recently adopted off of Craigslist. Levi rents the room for the night with the puppy inside and does something to her that's absolutely horrifying. This single act would later spark the most disturbing expose of abuse against animals in internet history. But Levi isn't alone. His low wage isn't actually enough to afford a puppy, let alone rent a motel. He doesn't have a car or even a license to get there. There's one person who helps him, and he is somebody who's been plaguing the Pacific Northwest for almost half a century, harming small animals with cruelty and brutality. Timothy George Amoroso, otherwise known online as Timwin or Dog Dude. He is a 64-year-old man from Washington, and his online activity actually goes all the way back to the 90s. During the early days of the internet, especially in and bestiality-based Usenet groups like Alt Bestiality, he was seen often using the name Dog Dude, and sometimes even actually attached his real name to the posts. Now in these group chats, he would lay out instructions on how to engage with female dogs, and share stories of his own that he enjoyed, and connect with others who were also disturbingly interested in animals the same way he was. Now over the following years, he would attend meetups across the West Coast, presenting himself both in person and online as just an ordinary guy who loves animals. But at one point he would even express a deep attachment to a golden rat puppy he received back in 1996. But behind all of it, Tim has already developed an obsession with causing pain and suffering, and his animal victims would stay conscious, throughout all the torture, visibly distressed, and some wouldn't even survive what he put them through. However, even that wouldn't stop him from continuing to feed his sadistic desires. With cameras and editing software on the rise, he would begin producing disturbing videos of animal cruelty, sometimes even working with other zoo sadists to record himself, inflicting suffering on animals. Back in 1998, for example, he gets together with an unknown man and produces one of the most infamous pieces of work, Hung. The video starts with a dog hanging from a tree in the middle of the woods. Her body twitches for a couple of seconds before the video cuts again. This time, however, she's no longer moving, still hanging there. A man then walks into the frame and does something deeply disturbing. You can probably imagine what it might be. And as internet technology actually advanced, in the early 2000s, Tim would begin to share explicit content regarding bestiality under a different alias of his, Rainsters. And surprisingly, it wouldn't take long for him to become somewhat known for a set of disgusting videos involving a Labrador named Chunky. In one of his posts at the time, he would even say this:
"Here's a famous yellow Labrador."
And in parentheses, porn star.
"And a friend. She reminds me about Chunky from Pet Lab. Is it her? Yes, I own her. She is very sweet. Sweet star."
And he would just continue torturing puppies and filming it throughout his anonymous accounts, which would lead to his videos spreading widely across the internet, until a group of vigilantes whose goal is to target sadists within the community connects this footage back to the name Rainsters, and actually to him as Tim. And they corner him into confessing, and he actually folds immediately. He tells them he will stop, and in response, they let him go. The event isn't well documented online, but the only reason we know it happened is because not long after, Tim would just go right back to harming puppies, which unsurprisingly just ends with him being caught online once again. But this time, the person who finds him is actually another bestiality advocate named Douglas Spink, also known as Fausty.
"You were given a second chance in 2009 when we caught you doing this horrific shit again. Some, like me, were opposed. You made promises and promises, promises. We warned you that if you ever got even near another dog, you were done. No excuses, no third chances, no free passes. With the whole murdering, torturing puppies thing. Zero."
And this event turned Tim around. He would drop the name Rainsters and disappear from the internet. Is something I would like to say, but unfortunately this isn't the end either. It would be about 4 years before he shows up again, this time bringing his disturbing activity to a new platform, Reddit. In September 2014, he opens an account under the alias MatePups, and his posting history would revolve entirely around a subreddit he created and constantly promoted, called r/innocent victim reports. At first glance, it seems like a true crime page, just focused on news stories involving children and sometimes animals. But the first sentence of the page's description makes it immediately clear something is very twisted about this.
"This is for those that like to follow the news articles of the abuse of innocent prey."
And this isn't even the disturbing part though. Tim would advertise this very subreddit on violent roleplay pages like r/struggle, which centered around non-consensual fantasy scenarios. It turns out r/innocent victim reports is his own public collection of real cases involving children in horrific situations, which he actually collects and obsesses over for disturbing purposes. His sadism isn't limited to animals anymore. He now wants to carry out depraved acts on anyone and anything too weak to fight back. Now, for reasons that still aren't clear, Tim leaves the MatePups account in May 2015 and then returns later the same year under a new name, Dogslot. And with his new account, he becomes even more blatant about his obsession with causing harm, continuing to post on his own subreddit r/innocent victim reports with increasingly gruesome and seemingly racist titles. And he actually created another subreddit called r/dead dogs.
New animal sub, PM me if you like the use of animals. I do find dead dogs and puppies very.
For the most part, Tim's public sadism posts are only noticed by a handful of disgusted users. One Redditor, however, isn't sickened, but instead intrigued and starts trying to make contact with him.
I'm so happy that I pushed us to becoming friends on Reddit. I'm so happy I met you. Yeah, Reddit. Who would have thunk it? I know, right? It's quite the amazing coincidence.
Now, prior to meeting Tim in 2016, Levi actually never had the chance to act on his sadistic ideas of hurting an animal. He lived with his family and couldn't drive since he was legally blind. But Tim was his vehicle. He had decades of experience, a car, and long-standing eagerness to help others to harm animals. And by coincidence, the two lived just 5 hours apart, which meant that they could now carry out their twisted fantasies together. And as you know, in the fall of 2016, that possibility became real. They purchased a female puppy off Craigslist and took her to the Motel 6. And they would do these disturbing things to this puppy. Although the original plan was to end the life of the puppy once they were done, Levi couldn't actually bring himself to do it after looking into her eyes. So instead, they decided to take her and leave her in an unknown location somewhere in the county. Now, the following days after that, the two of them would try again and again to get another puppy to take advantage of. But then out of nowhere, Levi decided to ask Tim one question.
Have you thought of any ideas as well, by the way, as to what we should do with the toys?
And then Tim gives a graphic description of what he plans to do. Now, shortly after that, in between plotting to use another puppy, Tim would ask Levi to get him into Zoo Zadim chats on Telegram, where many other infamous furry criminals were active. And in exchange, he offers sadistic child predator chats from the darknet and agrees to help Levi gain access to Animals Dark Paradise, a Zoo Zadim focused Telegram group chat. Now time passes, and Levi keeps spreading the footage he and Tim made in 2016. And eventually, vigilantes like Shadow Wolf and Pseudonym would find these videos and trace everything back to him, which meant that finally on September 14, 2018, Levi would get cornered by the two vigilantes. And everything he does in the next few days will lead to his arrest on charges related to animal cruelty. Tim, however, never gets charged with anything. Shadow Wolf and Pseudonym, for reasons still unclear, weren't able to hand over what they had on him to the police. Instead, they would send all the evidence to the FBI at a later time. But that doesn't change the fact that they stopped the one investigation that had the best chance of putting Tim in prison. Now in April 2019, Douglas, the same guy who let Tim off 10 years ago, gets contacted directly by people involved in the Zoo Zadim expose. And as their conversations would go on, Douglas would slowly realize that Tim was actually involved, which leads to Douglas actually trying to catch Tim again, since he warned him already. But that is when Tim's internet activity would suddenly disappear. Now normally going silent is common, especially for people who know others are out to expose them. But Tim's disappearance didn't make any sense at all. He didn't go quiet until months after that came out. But then after 4 months, in November 2019, Tim would send an email to Togglerad, the co-host of Douglas' podcast, Zooer Than Thou.
Please let Doug know that I am under a LEO,
law enforcement officer,
investigation. I hope he can now rest better for his remaining days. I'm in a recovery program and have been for some time. I know that means nothing because of the damage and destruction I've done in my life. Not sure how I will go out, but it is soon. Regards.
Now this wasn't even it. People actually find out that Tim created another Reddit account called Up For Anything 985. Also using the name Muddling. And he actually made a post in the subreddit r/offender support asking for advice about treatment options for his obsessions.
Hi, I have for over 40 years have done behaviors that are deviant. I wish not to have the desires or compulsions anymore. At the very least, I need the tools to stop. I've been trying to find counseling for my issue. Twice I was told and referred to seek offender treatment. Is it possible to get into a program voluntarily? Everything I've researched says it's for a person that have been convicted of an offense.
He would then also make another post on a similar subreddit, this time looking for more help with his urges.
I'm an addict. I've acted out in very bad ways. I'm in an SA group and have some 3 weeks of sobriety. I've hurt so many animals from acting out that there's no way the members or God will accept me. It hurts too much. I'll just send it if that comes to pass. This is my last chance to fit in.
Douglas was actually somehow trying to end his compulsions, either through treatment, religion, or even death. But in the end, none of that happened. On December 10th, 2019, just 6 days after Levi gets arrested, Tim shares a news story about a 12-week-old puppy that had been hurt and dumped by the roadside in Boston, reminding everyone he's still free and still out to cause as much pain as he can. Once again, he broke his promises and went back to his old ways. A month later, Tim would be found following Tekida, another zoo sadist, on Ink Bunny, a furry community website, showing he fully intends to keep going. And with no charges filed, Tim would once again slip through the cracks, facing no legal consequences.